This one is, I just copied from last week, the discussion we wanted to bring forward regarding a couple of releases back. We had introduced this ability to configure ECDH curves for the inbound and outbound traffic as a mesh config. And in this one, attach the get issue over here. We just wanted to set the ability. We didn't do that one for the Istio mutual traffic, which is a mesh traffic. And this one is to add that capability to enable ECDH curves in the mesh MTLS traffic. And the requirement mainly stems from some of the work that we are doing with post-quantum, making applications quantum safe. And one of the abilities that we need to do is we need the ability to configure ECDH curves, cipher suites, and signature algorithms, and all those things to use these quantum safe algorithms that we have. So currently, Boring SSL, which is what Envoy uses, has support for one quantum safe algorithm that we have with the ECDH curves, and I've mentioned that one over here, the name of that one, the draft 001. So, so that is where the requirements stemmed from, to be able to apply that one to the mesh internal traffic as well. We anticipate the change to not be that big of a change. It should be a simple change. I was hoping that I could finish a draft PR for this one before the meeting, but I'll upload that one this week itself, so that you have a look at what the changes might look like. So any questions, or this is... So right now we have two configurations in the mesh config, the mesh MTLS and the TLS defaults. So we have the ability to specify these ECDH curves on the TLS defaults config that we have. So the change pretty much involves updating the mesh MTLS as well to have the ability to specify ECDH curves on the mesh MTLS as well.
So basically, if I understand you correctly, you want to be able to configure the quantum safe curve, which is this one I highlighted here. You want to be able to configure it on the mesh mutual TLS in mesh config.
Yeah, mesh MTLS does not. Right now, the TLS config over there does not have it. What in the code, what we do is that we ignore that one if the ECDH curves is set for the Istio mutual traffic. We want to just update that curve where if it is Istio mutual traffic, we want to accept those ECDH. We need to be able to process those, apply those ECDH curves to the mesh internal traffic. It can be post quantum or any other ECDH curves. If the use case is not post quantum, in this case, we still can configure the internal traffic if that is Istio in the Istio mutual mode. So
yeah, got it. Costin.
So the feature to allow customization of quantum whatever curves and anything, that's wonderful.
Yes.
Don't have any problem with that.
Yes.
My concern is that it's such a narrow use case, and so most people use RSA and don't even. We don't even have by default EC certificates. It's a problem with UX and exposing users to more settings. We have 500 settings probably in mesh config and all the other environment variables. And the TLS settings are all over the place. There are some settings in API, some settings in mesh config. There is a default, which probably you don't want default, you want mandatory, and it's very, very hard to keep track of everything and understand even the things that are commonly used and more important. So if we could find a way to put all those arcane things in a different place or in some place that is out of the way and doesn't confuse users, I would feel much better about it. And there are ways. It could be a build time option when build with by default Istio with the quantum safe everything and in a mode that is super locked down. And the users who actually want this, they will have, guaranteed that, they don't even have to configure anything to by default set, or we may have some, separate config files so we don't keep voluting mesh config, or we can have a discussion about how to restructure mesh config to keep all the TLS settings make sense. So no problem with the feature, but how we expose it as an API, that's something that it's not specific to this particular feature. This one is just particularly narrow.
I mean, I understand the concern, cost, and I think we had this discussion and in the previous feature request that was open and everything. So this one is not adding anything into this one. It's just a code change over there for, I think, and the whole point of adding a mesh MTLS too, and it's very confusing. I agree. I mean, I had to read through a lot of stuff to understand what was the difference between all these different settings over there. But this is pretty much using what we have already over there, mesh MTLS and TLS defaults that we already have implemented a couple of releases back. It's just a code change where, so right now it just applies the ECDH curves to the simple and mutual mode. And then this one is just to add that one to the Istio_mutual. So we are not technically changing anything in the fundamental, like what users already.
Sorry about it. Yeah, I understand. Sorry, I misunderstood. If there is no API change, it's well, my comment is still, I still have the concern, but if it's just code change,
I totally agree about where that confusion comes from. Confusion, or at least it took me some time to understand the difference between, okay, what exactly is being done, TLS defaults and MTLS mode, but it's already, we are just going to use what's existing over there. We've already hashed through the differences over there. But the one thing that I was looking at when I was doing the implementation was with this one was to see if we even wanted to combine those two, like TLS defaults and mesh MTLS. It can be a little confusing having those two different, setting the ECDH curves in two different places within mesh config. But I think there's a good reason why we would want to keep them separate, simply because if we decide to use, for example, in the prototype that we are doing within our group that's looking at post-quantum, the client and the server, the external client and external servers that we have to talk to may know nothing about quantum safe, but within our mesh, we probably want to lock it down to be, if we want to say, okay, this is post-quantum ready, we will probably want to provide that ability to use those quantum safe algorithms within the mesh, even if the client and the server do not support those use cases. So I think it's still a good idea to keep those two settings separate, and then just use it's just a code change underneath. So we're not exactly doing any API changes in this case.
Yeah. So Marian, so since there's no API change, I think the decision would be easier. So once you have the PR, maybe you can send a draft PR for the team to review. There are a couple of questions in the chat for you. So John was asking draft 00, does it imply if it's unstable? And the Quad is asking about if this is for FIPS.
Yeah, it's not related to FIPS. It's just post-quantum, quantum safe. And the reason it's draft, I think, is because NIST is going through the process of standardizing what's quantum safe. So it's going through that process. It started out with more than 100 submissions for the quantum safe algorithms, and it has 4 different stages. And I think it's been going on for 1 or 2 years, but they're at the final stage of verifying, and I think there's final 3 or 4 algorithms that they have verified that, okay, these are quantum safe. So it's a long list of tests that it goes through to get to that stage where it says, okay, these are the quantum safe algorithms that we support. So that's why still there are 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 algorithms that has reached the final stages. And I think by the end of this year that they will announce which ones qualify for quantum safe algorithms, both for signature algorithms as well as key exchange. So Boring SSL right now supports that draft 00, which is what Envoy also supports. And there was a PR that was, and I've included that one also in the link. So there was a PR that was submitted also to add this ECDH curve to the inbound and outbound curves that we support in Istio. So that's already there. We just need to fix a part for the in-mesh traffic.
Yeah.
One comment, sorry, Lynn.
Go ahead.
So,
I was going to call you. Yeah.
yeah, so I understand worrying about quantum computers. It's an important worry, but you mentioned, Miriam, that you find the code hard to understand and the configuration hard to understand. I said exactly the same thing. I don't know if anyone in this call can raise their hand and say that, oh, I love how we configure things, and I think we have good UX and so usually most compromises and security problems will be by misconfiguration, not by quantum computer attacking us. Like we had the certificate validation. We have all kinds of other things that are, and most of them stem from complex code and complex settings and hard to. So probably we should prioritize at some point fixing the root problem and what we should be worried about user misconfiguring and not understanding how to set up things and worry a bit less about the quantum computers coming. Anyway, that's just kind of a comment, but hopefully other people have similar concerns about the current complexity and will be able to do something about it at some point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. There's similar work related to the post-quantum stuff, the quantum safe thing being done in other projects like HA Proxy, SSL curl, and all those different projects. I just worked on HA Proxy last year, so they are including all these things already into all those projects. So we just starting to look at this one for Istio side. So just wanted to bring that up, that, okay, this work is already starting in other projects. So
Awesome, Quat.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we don't be careful about saying it as API, because this is implementation dependent. So you can't implement an API that depends on implementation. So I think as long as it stays within sort of settings that are not considered as a first-class API, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
We just should not add it as a first-class API because it's unimplementable, in certain.
Yeah, Quad, we're not changing anything from the API perspective. This is just adding the ability already within the code that's already, it's just one curve that's already added there, that in the supported ECDH curves. This is just adding ability to enable Istio to identify ECDH curves that are set using the mesh MTLS setting in mesh config that's already there. So there's not going to be any API change for this one.
And is this trying to do the combination curve where it's trying to fall back with a special hello?
Yeah. So if this ECDH curve is specified, it will use it. If it's not specified, it uses the default ECDH curves that Envoy supports. So yes.
Well, the way that the Chrome deployed post-quantum is that they have this special curve that sort of the server will pick quantum as a preference, but it can always fall back to X25519 in case it doesn't work.
If it doesn't work, okay.
So is it the same style you're trying to do? Is it just strictly post-quantum?
It's not strictly post-quantum. It's not strictly. If it's specified, it uses it. If it's not, it falls back to whatever the default is that Envoy provides.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the main problem with post-quantum is not really the curve, it's the big size of the key.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's fine. It's because we'll probably hit issues in any case. So it's better to figure them out earlier than later.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, if that the specified post-quantum curve is not supported, it falls back to whatever the default is set for by Envoy.
All right. Does anyone have more question or concerns for Marian?
I'm just going through the questions in the chat, and then I'll just post over here the links for HA proxy that I know of, so the work that's being done over there. So
what do you think, the AJ proxy UX is better than ours or worse?
but that's a confusing question, but I don't think it's worse. The way that they have it over there is it's cleaner in the sense that they don't have all these different things for the same thing that they're trying to do. So they just support these additional curves, and all the implementation is it's within the code. So from the UI perspective, it just has ability to specify the curve names one way. And I think the confusing part that probably we could look at from Istio's side is this having these different settings, which is what I found most confusing is the MTLS. There are two configurations where we can specify ECDH curves. So, and I think that is the part that where we can actually put in a little more, take a look at, because to see whether the mesh TLS and the TLS defaults, these two different configurations for specifying ECDH curves. To a user, they really need to understand, okay, this one is just for Istio mutual mode, and this one is for simple and mutual mode, and then to just understand the difference between those two things. I think that is one part that can probably use a little bit of help over there. But which curve do we use? I mean, the quantum safe thing is just one special use case, but it could be applied to if anybody wanted to configure. At the time when I think when we were looking at this one, there wasn't a use case for the mesh internal traffic. This one is just one use case where we would want to set the internal traffic with a specific ECDH curve. So that's just a different. In HA proxy, what I've seen is that they have just one way of setting the ECDH curves. There aren't all these different settings for, inbound, outbound, mesh internal, and all those things. So let me try to find the documentation related to that, what they're trying to do, and what we try to implement over there in HA proxy. I'll just put it up over there.
That would be great if you can share that offline. So Mary, I saw a lot of questions related to ambient. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the new ambient mode in Istio. Have you considered using ambient in your environment for this?
No, we haven't looked at ambient at all for this use case to see. We are still, looking at the old Istio sidecar way of doing things. So I haven't looked at ambient. How would ambient affect the way that we would? I mean, don't these apply the setting ECDH curves in the ambient mode?
That's a great question. My understanding is that this PR is only for sidecars. John, do you want to tell me or Justin?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the simple answer is just that ambient doesn't use Envoy. Would be one part.
Yeah, but it should respect the settings. I mean, if the user wants to use post quantum, whatever, it should be in the mention. It should not break ambient. That's what was saying, that we should have a way that is consistent and kind of either is a default everywhere, or it doesn't require user to if I use Envoy cycle, if I use AJ proxy, if I use to have 20 different settings just to get things talking with each other. Because it needs to be set absolutely everything using MTLS will need to have this curve, otherwise it will fall back and it will not be quantum safe.
So with ambient, does that mean so the user does not have an option to specify these curves? Like,
That is correct.
And if they wanted to set that one, that would be something that we would have to implement separately. Okay.
I would have some major discussions before, like, it's not someone needs to just go implement it. We need to agree to do it first. I think there's a large growing consensus that the correct way to do TLS security is to provide sane defaults, not to provide a knob for every option, which is the approach we've taken in zTunnel. It's the approach that Go is taking. So if we're going to diverge from that, then we need to have a serious conversation.
So when you say defaults, right? So I'm trying to think of this use case where this use case of using quantum safe algorithms. So if that use case comes up, I mean, we don't have to do it right now, but that use case comes up, then we and that probably does not affect Istio, right now, but later on, if we have to do this one, which veers away from the defaults, we would probably have to think about it at that point. Provide that functionality in ambient to set something that is not the default. Now, how would this one work? I mean, and this probably I could probably ask Fasil about this one for what they have to do with the telco use case that they had for setting this one with the client and server TLS settings. I'm curious as how they would do this one with ambient mode, because they would have to set something that
not
is
using ambient.
there as well. What's that?
They're not using ambient as far
Ambient,
as
exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are not using ambient either. So
Yeah. Okay. I saw a couple of hands. I will make sure to get to them. We also have other topics. So Keith, go ahead, and Ian next.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with John in the sense that, like, if we want to support this sort of less customization in ambient, we should have a discussion. I do think that maybe as a middle ground, it might make sense to allow setting these sort of TLS customizations by default, like not by default, but at compile time, at build time, so that the open source distribution of zTunnel and by proxy ambient can have the safe defaults. And if people want to be able to set different TLS algorithms and things like that, it's likely they want that everywhere and not want that to change, at runtime or for certain workloads. So I would be in favor of allowing that sort of flexibility, similarly to how we have different, we have guides or guidance on how to create FIPS Istio. I think this is the same sort of thing that should be done at compile time and not runtime.
yeah, for this one specifically, we're not looking at changing anything on the ambient side. We're just looking at the sidecar model. But yeah, I agree. I mean, if this was not already supported for ambient and we need to do this one for ambient, if we get to that stage, then probably yes. Looks like, yeah.
Ian, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I generally like John's approach here about making it less confusing and maybe not exposing this particular API or consuming it with zTunnel. That wasn't actually what I originally had in mind. Can zTunnel even support this type of cryptography right now by default? I mean, we can plug in boring at build. So sure.
Yeah, I mean, they have some experimental Rust TLS post-quantum
Okay,
things.
cool.
So it's pluggable. So I mean, if someone it's all a matter of how much work someone's willing to do. Even if there wasn't, in theory, someone could go do the plugin to plug it.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's that much needed to plug because it looks like they have a lot of it. But again, as experimental quality. So
Sure. All right.
Okay, I think I don't know if we have consensus here. I think, Marian, one big concern just raised by the recent conversation is on the ambient side. We don't want you break ambient. So if you were adding this particular configuration to Istio, and Istio does plan to support ambient sidecar interrupt, so that's some concern raised by the team.
Well, it could be a waypoint thing too, right? If you set up the waypoint
Could do, yes.
photography that zTunnel doesn't support out of the box,
Yes.
it's a bad time. So.
Yeah. So, Marian, I think, yeah, maybe the next step, we'll have to, maybe you want to educate yourself a little bit on ambient too, because that's an important mode of Istio, and we don't want what you are adding would break ambient.
Okay. Okay. I'll take a look at that one and see if there's any test cases that I can add to test those scenarios as well with ambient also enabled.
All right. Does anyone wants to say anything before we move to the next topic? John?
I just, to be clear, there's no testing needed to be done. I can tell you there's only one curve supported in zTunnel, and it's not configurable. So it's not a matter of testing. It's just, it's what it is.
Well, it is the case I was thinking was with if we have can there be a setting where we have separate clusters and one is using ambient and the other one is not? Because right now all the testing that we are doing is just with the default Istio way of testing.
Yeah, then they won't unless you fall back to the curves that zTunnel is using.
So in this case, what can we do in order to
you can do a special build. I think it was case of somebody mentioned early. You could potentially do a build of Istio and then add the particular
okay, and then test it that way. Yeah, okay. We'll do that, yeah.
All right, great discussion. Let's move to the next topic. Thank you so much, Marian, for your interest using Istio on this scenario. We actually would love to hear from you when you have it implemented, because I think having Istio in quantum scenario is very exciting. All right, moving to John, you're up next.
I am? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to let people know, if you weren't following the schedule, the code freeze for 1.23 is coming up next week, I think. The release shortly after that. So if you have anything you want to get into 1.23, it's probably too late. But if you have something that you feel is a release blocker, and you're not Rama, who has the only known release blocker, make sure we know about it so that we get it in. That's all. Well, that's all for me. I don't know. Maybe the release managers have something, but.
All right, thank you. Do we know who are the release managers? It's good for everybody to know, I guess. Daniel, do you know? Actually, Daniel is not on. Oh, Daniel, you're on the call. I think you might be one of the release managers.
123, Mike Morris is the lead.
I am not the lead. I am just shadowing. I just
Oh,
happen
shadowing.
to have been approving a bunch.
Okay, I've seen your name the most. That's why I thought it was you. But let's according to the wiki, it's Sumat, Zhonghu, and Mike.
Okay, awesome. Oh, thank you. Sorry, you're not.
Yeah.
I
And I think Sumat just joined the call.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, folks.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. Do you guys want to call out anything regarding 123 from a release perspective?
I need to follow up. I've been yeah, I've been a little bit out of touch this week, so I need to go back and I'll follow up if there is any concern from our side.
I have not personally seen anything that's concerning. I think there was one that needed a follow up and that happened. So I think we're in relatively good shape.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Any other topics?
I did 2 documents at the end of the review list, looking for feedback, please comment. The last one is probably Mitch probably needs to take a look and probably needs more work, but the FQDN hostname for pods, I have a PR in progress. I wanted to have a document as well, so we can discuss it in the document. It's also related with the PR I have open joint with cluster and secrets.
Is this the one I highlighted that you want people
Yeah.
to review? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll move it down.
I expect it to be a bit controversial, but should not. It's a very small code change, by the way. I mean, it's not a big deal, and it's just some settings that a user can. It's just a matter of if you want, I can talk about it.
Okay, do you want us to review and discuss next week, or how do you want to proceed?
That would be best. I mean, the TLDR is that I want to add a setting in Istio this that would allow us to include the DNS SAN with that particular syntax, which will allow regular clients to talk with a pod if they want to, using just DNS and standard libraries, and also allow us to do some checks on the cluster and based on the certificates, which is not currently possible. I mean, with George, you can find out the cluster. With MTLS clients, you cannot find out the cluster. And I know that we discuss OIDs and many other ways, and again, we can add them as well, but there's not a reason not to add a DNS SAN to the certificate. Anyway, take a look. Should be simple.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Carsten.
Yeah, I have some questions here. What are we going to do with it once we add it in there?
So what we are not going to do anything ourselves. I mean, other clients that use DNS will use it. I mean, if I have curl, I can use curl and will just be standard. I mean, if DNS and the DNS SAN are matching, then arbitrary clients that don't know anything about Istio, secure naming or other things would be able to connect with a pod and talk with a pod. And second, we could have policies, because we have all kinds of policies on SANs that do check if the SAN matches what we have, or in the case of Istio, we could look at the DNS SAN and extract the cluster. So again, how we use it or how other people use the DNS SAN, it's separate from just exposing this information. I mean, we could add checks on the telemetry side. It is discussed in the document what possible uses it can have. But that doesn't mean we need to do it in the same PR or change and add those.
I don't think I understand. So we say that we're adding this format.
Yes.
How does the client actually use that? Because that's not a DNS name.
No. In the document, it is a DNS name.
Well,
it is.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, it is a name that is the DNS format, but it's not a name that's in any DNS server that I've ever seen. So
if you go scroll down, I mean, in the document, it says that the Istio DNS interception will also answer queries to this document. So if you have a Istio DNS interception, it will work. And if you have DNS, external DNS or other tools that synchronize DNS, you will have this name populated. I mean, you own the suffix, you own the zone, and then you can populate those names, and so basically it will work fully end to end. For external clients, for non-Istio clients that want to talk with those names, basically to be completely standard DNS certificates, DNS entries, DNS everything. For the other use cases where you use the DNS SAN to extract information, that's
How does a user know what, like, how do they know to call this? I just don't get how, as a client, I would know I want to do curl HTTP bin xy1247272.cluster. Like, where do I get that DNS name to call?
that's a different story. I mean, it can be you know, how discovery works is independent of how you verify TLS certificate. I mean, you can customize the pod name, for example, in different ways. It's not necessarily that it has to be ZARD name.
I mean, like, I just feel like I'm missing some context. Like, I can't imagine how all this plays out in a real world scenario. Is there more context on the motivation here? Like, I get what you're saying. Like, yes, we could add this to the certificate and we could add it to DNS, and then a client could call it and it could verify it. But I just don't see a scenario where any of that would actually happen.
Well, let's take, for example, Istio D is a secret that we discussed yesterday.
Sure.
You authenticate with MTLS. You have no idea what cluster you're coming from. So with SDS, Istio D will get the arbitrary header cluster from the node metadata and serve secrets from any cluster, because it has no way to know that the client is coming from a cluster. If you authenticate with JOT, Kubernetes will tell you what cluster it is. With MTLS, we have no clue. That's a valid use case. I mean, to have information about the cluster in the DNS certificate seems useful.
Okay, but that's a 100% different use case. That's why I'm super confused, because maybe this is just a difference of how we think, because in my mind, I'm trying to find concrete use cases, and I think you have a more breadth approach. Like, if we say we want to put the cluster in there and we want to validate that in certain cases, that's fine. We can discuss that. But it's totally different to say we're going to make a DNS name for pods. Clients are going to call this DNS name. We're going to serve this in our DNS proxy. Like, that's a very different.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to do it. I mean, again, having DNS SANs have many use cases. There are many use cases that can be addressed by this. It's your own DNS use case. I mean, I'm not saying that having host name, it's a thing that host names are used in many ways. It's not one that is better than the other, or we have to have one particular use case that is. So do you disagree that we should have a cluster name in the DNS certificate?
Well, so that's the thing, is that I think it matters of what the use case is, because my concern is that if we go add a new attribute on the certificate, however it's formatted, doesn't matter, there's many CAs that people use with Istio. And presumably this would only be done with the Citadel CA, or maybe Citadel CA plus one other CA if someone correcting this is invested in it. So it's not really something we can actually rely on Istio, right? It's an optional thing that we could have.
Not really.
Functionality, if we said that you must have this new attribute, then that's not viable, is my opinion.
John, any CA, that's why I choose the DNS SAN, because any CA in the world is capable of, I mean, with Cert Manager, you can create certificates that have both SPIFFE SAN and DNS SAN. It's a matter of policy, of course. They need to have a similar policy where they follow the same structure. But any CA can put a DNS SAN. You don't require changes in client, you don't require changes in server, you don't require any changes.
I don't think it's accurate to say that any CA can just suddenly start putting this special formatted DNS certificate. Like, I know for a fact Cert Manager has an Istio integration that will only put in a SPIFFE SAN.
And you can easily modify it, when it can be easily modified, or you can use the policies, that certificate object.
Right. And that was one example. There's many CAs we integrate with, and there's no way we're going to go get them all to go have a new custom format. I don't even think, like, and I'm only using this as an example because I'm familiar with it. Like, Mesh CA at Google uses a shared root, and the only distinction between customers is the trust domain. Cluster name is not globally unique, unlike the trust domain. So like, I don't even know how this works in the general context of just the first CA that I thought of outside of Citadel. Like, I don't mind, like, it's one thing to say we're going to have optional usage, but to require this on every CA, that's a huge leap in break.
No.
That
John,
requires.
it's not required on all CAs. It's just some option. If the user wants to have it, they can enable for their use cases. I mean, it's not for everything. It's not for requirement. It's just something that some user may want to do for as an addition. And actually, I tested this, manually with Acme. So if you use a public zone, I mean, synchronized with a public DNS zone, you can actually use Acme certificates, and it will be issued if the support is visible. Or even with a DNS challenge, it works with Acme. Even for internal names, you can get publicly signed DNS certificates without the SPIFFE certificate, of course, but it works very well. I mean, if you have a DNS sync, you can integrate with absolutely anything you want.
Right. But the reason why I'm asking about the use cases is because if we're saying that this is a new optional feature, that some certificates will now have this field, then we absolutely need to make it clear which features will use this field so that it actually stays optional.
Yeah, I agree.
So we need to actually go through the list of features before we can even discuss what the field is and the format and if we should include it, in my mind.
Okay, so is it sufficient to put one use case and then implement the PR, or what exactly? You need a full all the features that could use it, one feature, two features?
I think we need to know we have to know what features in Istio. I mean, if you're using a feature outside of Istio, sure, you can do whatever you want, but
how about
what features in Istio will use it?
How about using it with SDS secrets and using an Istio ID? Just have fix that particular bug.
Okay, so optional additionals.
Yeah.
Verification.
Yeah. Optional includes the pod name namespace, and as an addition, we can also verify certificates in for telemetry. Does it work?
I mean, I guess I do kind of feel like the use case is so niche that like I just don't get what your goal is. Like,
less niche than quantum. I mean, my goal is to have verified pod namespace cluster in a certificate for MTLS, just like we have for jobs. I want parity, and I want any component that is talking Istio to have more information than just the pod. And we discussed it many times in the past about how telemetry is insecure, sorry, Quat, you have your head up for a while.
I talked a lot of in the chat, but what you're doing is effectively removing SPIFFE authentication scheme.
What?
Because in SPIFFE, you are supposed to not really care about CAs, but care more about trust domains. And trust domains can only come from your ISNs.
This
if you're proposing
SPIFFE, it's still used for client authentication. Secure naming is still used for pod-to-pod communication. It has absolutely. I mean, SPIFFE it's still there. I checked the specification, and they do support certificates that have both SPIFFE identity and DNS certificates.
Sure. Yeah, you can put anything in the certificate. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is that if you use things in certificate that are not SPIFFE and you allow authentication, you are not doing SPIFFE authentication. You're doing something else.
That's not correct.
I do agree that it's duplicative, though, right? Because we have basically a cert that has two SANs in it: the URI SAN of SPIFFE and the DNS SAN of what you're proposing.
Yeah.
And you have to use one or the other, basically. And if we're shipping both, like they both identified the pod, and we already talked about adding customizable suffix to the SPIFFE ID and the URI SAN, which means you have these things sitting next to each other in the cert, and you have to like pick one to use. You probably don't want to look at both, maybe you do, and that's my only concern, is that it feels duplicative with that, which makes documentation configuring, not foot gunning, a little trickier.
Yeah.
Like
So it's not duplicative. It's basically permissive. You're doing permissive SPIFFE authentication, which diminishes the value of SPIFFE.
But let me clarify. It's absolutely not what you're saying. I mean, it's authentication, meaning that how a server verifies the client. It's exactly the same. The server always verifies the service account, just like it is specified in the API. So the fact that you have 10 SANs in a certificate means that this certificate proves that those 10 things are true. It means that this certificate is true. It means that all the OIDs in the certificate need to be validated
yes. So
and verified.
you're
You
talking
still
about
use the
secure
same thing.
naming, right? But secure naming is not SPIFFE. It's a form of authorization.
Sure,
What you're supposed to do is authentication. So you verify your license during the handshake, not afterwards, like it's done in Istio.
So check the specification, the SPIFFE specification which allow DNS. Check the cert specification. I mean, there is nothing. And the adding the suffix. We should review the document and make sure John concerns about the use cases are documented. But any use case that you have in mind for modifying the SPIFFE URL to add the cluster name applies to this use case as well. So anything you put in that and about duplicative, we can discuss if the user should have a choice to use to modify its SPIFFE URL with arbitrary mangled information or OIDs or a DNS certificate format or multiple choices as well.
I think it's okay to add redundant information. So if it's just saying same thing as your ISAN, I think it's okay. But you have to verify your ISAN regardless. You should not fall back to some DNS SAN verification mode.
There is no fallback. It's just, basically the certificate certifies more things. It certifies that the pod has a FQDN, which is true. I mean, any pod can have an FQDN if you create a DNS entry.
That's fine. It's basically OID. It's just another attribute. It doesn't really.
OID is another attribute, and actually on JKE, all certificates do have. I mean, they do have the cluster name and pod ID information included. So it's already done to some extent. Just not as a DNS format. That's the only change that I'm proposing.
Well, it is still incorrect because just the FQDN in the DNS SAN is not related to trust domain at all. So you're effectively trying to say use another CA that corresponds to the cluster name, not trust domain.
No, I'm just saying that we certify that we verify that the pod name is, pod 1234.
Yeah, but DNS SAN is not meant for that. DNS SAN is an indication what kind of cert trust anchor to use, and what you put there is meaningful. It's not just a random attribute.
No, it's a fully qualified domain name that can be matched with a host entry.
Right. So the intention is that it has to match with a host name CA, which is not SPIFFE. Right.
How about we discuss in the document? Put a comment there if you believe that. I mean, it's the same CA. It's not.
It's same CA because Istio is not SPIFFE, fully SPIFFE compliant. But if you want it to integrate with strict SPIFFE compliant mode, the CAs will be different for different trust domains.
Yeah, if you can put a link to the strict SPIFFE spec, because I'm not aware of that.
So, Costin, going back to the use case, why does this need to be in Citadel rather than someone using a integrated CA that has this in more advanced capabilities?
That's what I did consider the first time, because that's already possible with set manager or with more small changes in set manager or using certificate object in set manager. So that's not a problem. I mean, it's already possible to do it with an external CA. But the reason I made this proposal is a discussion yesterday where, again, we have no way to protect secrets with the SDS stuff.
Yeah, but that doesn't even, I mean, in my mind, Citadel is the 99% use case, or maybe 90%.
Exactly. So 99%.
And the authentication for 99.99% of users uses JWT authentication anyway, so it's totally irrelevant, right? Almost no one's using MTLS for authentication to Istio. It's only for VMs, which is niche, to say the least. So I just don't get, I get why you might want this. I just don't get why it has to be in Istio. Like, it feels like a very, very, very obscure feature that can already be done today without changes to Istio. It just feels odd. I don't know.
I completely agree that everything can be done completely without any change in Istio. I mean, I had it working. I said certificates and DNS sync and so everything is already possible without changing Istio. The problem is that Istio doesn't have this information, and we are discussing mangling the SPIFFE certificate name to other cluster information, and it seems weird to say that it's okay to add the cluster name by mangling the name, and there are use cases for it, but using this kind of more standard way is out of bounds because there is no use cases. So we can do the same thing. We can have an external CA that is mangling the SPIFFE stuff if we want.
I would be fine with having. I'm fine with doing anything that's like outside of the core of Istio. Like if someone wants to have, like, there's no reason we need to have the spiffy URL explicitly just namespace/service count. End of line, right? If we want to add more attributes to the end or something, fine. If people want to use certs and put other things in them, fine. I'm even maybe fine with matching. I think you can already match DNS SANs in authorization policy. Maybe I'm wrong. So like you could already go get a certificate like this and match it in authorization policy. That also don't really get the use case for putting it in Istio.
Okay, let's talk about impersonation, India. I mean, which is specific to Citadel. It's a bigger hack, and you know, it's an alternative to what I'm proposing here. I mean, it's basically instead of verifying that the zTunnel FQDN, we have zTunnel impersonate, and which clearly violates workload identity and pretty much everything in Speak. I mean, if we have one in Citadel, why not have the other, which is safer?
Well, one is a requirement for ambient, which is the focus of the project for the last 2 years. And it's also done by other projects, including Kubelet now and other CAs. And the other is a very obscure feature that is likely, I'm guessing, the request of one customer. And I'm not saying it's not important to solve. I want to help solve it. It just feels like a very awkward feature in Istio that maybe gets added, and then 2 years later, we're like, what is this thing that we added 2 years ago when no one's using this? Why did we do this now with the headache? And like we've invented a new format and now we're matching. It just, maybe I'm missing the context. I don't want to like break your use case. It just seems very strange and unflexible to me. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's strictly better than what we are doing for zTunnel.
Like, is there a real user that's asking, I want this?
No. The use case is basically I had this working for. I mean, it has already been possible for years. I mean, it's nothing new here. The impetus for making this proposal is, you know, finding that security issue with the certificates with SDS, and the fact that we still have no way to securely verify remote clusters when MTLS is using cache expansion, other things. I mean, that's been a problem for many years since we introduced the remote secret. So and with telemetry, we discussed it many years ago that we have absolutely no way. We just use some completely unverifiable labels that anyone can forge, and I think we agreed that it's a problem, but nothing happens. So this is a relatively small change that allows people who want to have clear indication of what cluster was used to have this available without all the, you know, we're modifying the format of the SPIFFE, which has all the migration problem, all the risks. I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with it being external. It's not a problem. I mean, having an external CA replacing Istio CA with another one, it's super easy. It's you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would be less concerned if we said we want to go add cluster as an attribute into the certificate, use that in telemetry and verification of SDS. And if it's not there, we fall back, and maybe you have a strict mode where you don't fall back or something. Like that at least has a concrete use case. It's mapped to use. Like what concerns me about this is it just feels like we're going to go invent a new host name format, put that in our DNS server. Maybe clients would call it, maybe they'll verify it. Like there's just gaps in understanding how we get from the design doc to a real user getting value out of this.
So if we put in an OID and what you require all clients to change that, you know, to pass OID, which is very complicated and
no, that's the thing. I think this client thing is not going to be used, and I haven't heard any user that's asked for this. I don't understand the use case there. I think it's legitimate. Like we know we have two use cases we know of that have real usage. It's verified telemetry and MTLS authentication to Istio, which to be honest,
yes,
I don't personally care that much, but I can see why people care. But it's just such a niche authentication method. Istio. Like if we want to tackle those, that seems fine. I just feel like we're going and solving more problems than we need and introducing a lot of complexity to do that.
What is the complexity of adding a DNS instead from ID?
We're adding a completely new host name format that's completely arbitrary, made up by Istio. We're going to add that as a DNS name, tell users to call this DNS. Like we're inventing a lot of stuff here.
It's not you're not required to create the DNS entry. It's just something you could do if you choose to. I mean, it's, any host name on the internet should have a fully qualified domain name. And as a owner of the domain, I mean, if I have the mesh.internal and I want under mesh.internal to have all the pods represented, how would you do it? I mean, it's pod namespace cluster suffix. I mean, that's how one valid way to, if you want to organize your namespace, your zone in a different way, you are free to add it and use different format. But that's the most straightforward. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we also we need to also discuss like the uniqueness of cluster as well, because many organizations all have overlapping cluster names, both across organizations and
it's not a cluster name. Sorry, John. It's a cluster name that we use for multi-cluster. I mean, it's I did that we use internally, which has to be.
I get that it can work. It just we need to be careful about.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you're kind of.
John, how about adding this as comments to the document? Because I'm sure when we have the URL mangling, we can copy and paste all those concerns to that document and add the concerns about, migration, interoperability, compatibility, and all the other things that, and inventing our own format, which already do kind of to some extent in a spiff URL.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll drop it.
You don't have to drop it. I'm not trying to push back too hard here. I'm just trying to understand the use case, and
I'll send PR. I can send PRs to send manager. I mean, again, I completely agree that Istio probably should not be in like business of issuing certificate in the first place, and but I don't know how it will be implemented for SDS. Maybe we can disable MTLS authentication completely, but
yeah, I mean, honestly, like the amount of users legitimately requesting SDS over MTLS authentication is probably zero. But like
John, the problem is the opposite. The problem is we have zero users who request it, but we have an open way for people
I get it. That's what I meant is like removing it is actually probably, I don't know. I probably want to do it, but it's probably
removing that feature completely would be ideal. I mean, it's a very dangerous feature in the first place, but at least secure it or lock it on by default if we have so few users. I mean, you are the one who said we have few use cases and few users. It's anyway.
Hey guys, just a quick time check. It's time for Ambient meeting. So maybe let's rediscuss this next week. Carsten, I think I've heard a lot of ask for user cases and examples in the chat. If you can add those, that would be good. All right, thanks all. Bye.